Sowards-Wilson. I'm a candidate for the United States Senate. I'm third generation Air Force. My father and my grandfather were both flyers, and I grew up around aviation. And then went to the Air Force Academy myself, served as an officer in the Air Force, and came to New Mexico to marry my husband. Started a small business here, and we started a family. And then I served in the cabinet for Governor Gary Johnson as the cabinet secretary for Children, Youth, and Families. Served in the Congress for 10 years, all of that time on the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as either Armed Services or the Intelligence Committee. And I'm running for the Senate because we have some very serious problems that we face as a nation. Some really deep problems, and it's going to take tough leadership to get out of it, and that's why I'm running.
I'm Greg Sowards. I'm running for U.S. Senate. I've had a number of, I guess you would say, awakenings over the years as I watch our representatives and senators in Washington. It seems like whenever they get elected, they drop a few IQ points. But anyway, I was raised in New Mexico. I attended the Albuquerque Public Schools, and at 14 we moved to Los Lunas. We had a small farm. After that I went to New Mexico Military Institute Junior College. After graduation I enlisted in the Army, served honorably overseas, and then returned home to UNM, or to attend UNM. That's where I met my wife. We started our family. I've taught in the public schools. I had a manufacturing business. I was awarded 5 U.S. patents for the past 25 years, and despite the stranglehold of government regulations, we were able to grow a child care business in southern New Mexico, and we now have 75 employees and care for over 600 children. I understand what makes the economy work. I've owned businesses and been involved in it my whole life. I know what it's like to sign a paycheck on both sides, and I think those are experiences that you take to Washington. And it's not the experience that we have in politics that counts. It's the real life experiences that we take to Washington to answer the everyday questions. If political experience were a great asset in Washington, then we wouldn't be $16 trillion in debt and wondering when the next shoe is going to fall. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm married. I have 6 children, 6 married children, and 20 grandchildren. We just had our 20th last Friday.
Greg, I'll start with you with the first question. What proposals would you support or propose to cut the deficit while at the same time promoting economic growth and job creation?
Well, I think we need to look at what actually creates jobs. I have a rule, I guess, that I go by, and that is what we tax and regulate we get less of, and what we subsidize we get more of. And so if we want to create jobs, we need to relax regulation and taxes, and we need to encourage businesses to come home. How do we do that? Well, one thing we could do is we could repatriate the funds that are held overseas in different corporations, and they don't want to bring these funds home because then they're taxed on it. They have over $1 trillion worth of assets trapped overseas that they can't bring home, or else they lose a good portion of that. I believe we could relax those restrictions. Those would create over 1 million jobs almost immediately. At present, we have the death tax has been reinstated. In 2013, it's going to go up to 55% of anything over $1 million. So you have basically a small business in America today, and you have first, second generation that's working this business, and if it's worth $3 million and the owner dies, then that $2 million is then taxed. The family has to come up with $1 million to pay for that, and they can't do it, so the company then changes hands and eventually becomes extinct. So I think we could do it well. I don't think that the death of a citizen should be a taxable event.
With respect to the deficit, I think I strongly support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And I think that would put us in a situation where Washington can't spend money that we don't have. And I supported a balanced budget amendment before. I think we need one to the Constitution now. I also think we need to control government spending and engage in some of the reforms of government programs that will take them off autopilot and really scrub what we need to do. So it's a combination of things to get the deficit under control so that we can get back to strong job creation. With respect to job creation and economic development particularly, government cannot create wealth. It can create the conditions for small businesses and entrepreneurs to invest and create jobs. And that means low taxes and fair, predictable government regulations. I don't think we have a predictable environment for regulations right now, and I actually support a moratorium on job-killing regulations. I also think that we need a balanced long-term energy plan for this country that increases domestic energy exploration and production, and that also will create jobs. The guy who is likely to win the Democratic primary for the Senate race voted against a balanced budget amendment for the Constitution and for the so-called stimulus bill. He voted against the Keystone Pipeline and for cap and trade. All of those would be devastating for job growth in America.
Do you support the proposed Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument for Doñana County? And if not, what protections for those lands would you support?
Well, we now have a situation where there have been two bills introduced in the Congress. One by Steve Pierce that protects the organs but in a smaller footprint. I know that there are some issues still with that bill, and Steve is working through those with the community. Another that Senator Udall and Senator Bingaman have introduced, which is a much larger piece of land and includes land that is not even near the organs in southern Doñana County. Some very serious concerns with that approach to legislation, particularly when it comes to law enforcement and border security, and making sure that we don't create an avenue for drug trafficking and human trafficking right up through New Mexico. When it comes to public lands issues, and our delegation is always involved in public lands issues because 40% of the land area in New Mexico is owned by the federal government. Another 11% or so owned by state government. And so you always have to deal with issues related to public lands, and I've dealt with them in numerous ways, where you settle land disputes or you make land trades and swaps because work needs to get done. In general, I look for local consensus to build before you try to force through legislation that favors one set of parties over another. And that forces people to work out problems at the local level related to everything from grazing rights to law enforcement concerns, rights of way, clearance of title, and protection of cultural resources. So with respect to the organs, my perception here is that local consensus has not formed, and that what you have are two competing approaches, and really the community has to work a lot of these things out before it gets to a point where it's ripe for legislation.
Well, early on in this discussion, the Bureau of Land Management indicated that they felt the organs would be, protected and looked after just with the current situation. But the legislators want to do more. I don't know that there's a consensus among the population at this point, but I would prefer Steve Pierce's bill, Congressman Steve Pierce's bill, over Jeff Bingaman or Tom Udall's. I think that theirs is more of a, well, I look at it as kind of a wilderness encroachment into our lives. Some of this land that they wanted to put under the bill was within 5 miles of the border, and eventually they had to back off on that. Now I have a son that's in the Border Patrol. They're knocking down more drugs now. They're finding guns and weapons with those drugs, and that makes for a much different situation, not to mention the human trafficking element. It's not just about people wanting to come to America to take advantage of what we have here. The economy in Mexico is, of course, speeding up, and so that's helping alleviate that problem somewhat. But I am for, now I have down that the federal government owns about 60% of the land in New Mexico, or has reign over that. And I've long been a proponent of states' rights and the ability of states to determine their own future and their outlook as far as what they want and what their citizens need. And I look to the state to provide that more than the federal government.
Greg, We'll start with you, and this is a little bit of a hypothetical, but
Great.
perhaps
Politicians
not all
love
that
to deal in hypotheticals.
I
that's
know,
for
I know.
sure.
That's why I preface it that way. If the Supreme Court strikes down the health care law, what steps, if any, do you think Congress should take to replace that?
Okay, well, you know, they definitely need to look at stabilizing Medicare and Medicaid. I know that our present governor, Susana Martinez, would like the federal government just to get uninvolved with the Medicaid aspect and not determine what hoops the state has to jump through. She feels that we could be much more efficient if they just kind of butted out of it. And so I don't look to the federal government as the solution to our health care problems. You know, we have a document here, the U.S. Constitution, and that just isn't, I don't believe, part of constitutional law. It's an encroachment of our rights as citizens of New Mexico and sovereign and citizens, that the federal government wants to step in and take over that aspect of our life. One sixth of the economy. And I see that that's a real detrimental thing. And the less federal government we can have in our health care, the better we'll be. I don't want a bureaucrat standing between me and my health care provider.
I do think that the health care bill is unconstitutional because it, for the first time, would force people to purchase a government-approved product. But I also, you know, so I think that the Supreme Court should throw it out. But if they don't, it does need to be repealed and replaced. The question is, what are the problems in healthcare and in federal programs for healthcare, and what needs to be done to do those? What should it be replaced with? To me, first and foremost, for example, you should allow small businesses to band together and to get the same good insurance rates that big businesses get. You should be able to buy your health insurance across state lines. Right now you can't do that. You have to buy health insurance from a company here in New Mexico. I mean, if we can buy our car insurance from a company in Texas, we should be able to buy our health insurance from a company in Texas. I also think that we need tort reform in this country to keep down the frivolous lawsuits. And we need to reform some of these major government programs that aren't serving people well. I believe we should have a safety net, and that we should have health care programs for the elderly and the poor and for low-income children. But they should also work exceptionally well at improving people's health status, and they don't right now. Medicaid is largely a program that pays for episodes of very serious critical illness. It doesn't control costs by improving people's health status and avoiding having to have a major serious illness. I've seen that. I saw that as the Cabinet Secretary for Child Welfare, where we had some of the Medicaid programs under us. And I've seen it in rehab hospitals, where they're teaching people who were diabetics who had their legs amputated to be independent again. But the system doesn't help them to avoid having to have the amputation. That's a system in desperate need of reform. And I think we have to do that in the federal government.